There are lots of reds out there, and we happen to have two in our palette of colors. One is the Permanent Rose. And the other is our Scarlet Lake. You want to see full saturation. So if we mix the two together, we'll get something in between, so that you can create or have a range of 3 different reds. This is a cool red, and this is a warm red, a medium red. So these are your colors that you really can work with, and then you can modify from these depending on what your subject matter looks like. And of course you'll have the tints that go along with them if you're deciding to paint a pink specimen. Now the next issue is, what do we use for shadows? So we have 4 possibilities. We have the complement, we have botanical gray, we have Windsor violet, and we also have neutral tint. The way to go about this is to see what these shadows will do when they are overpainted with a color, because normally in botanical art what you do is you start with your tea wash and then you put down your shadow color, and usually the shadow color falls into one of these categories. The complement is usually green, so we can take and we'll paint a swatch of green here, not to go too dark, and botanical gray. All right, so here we have some botanical gray. It's a little wet, so pick up the puddle. My famous phrase, pick up the puddle. Then we have some Windsor violet. And the last but not least is neutral tint, which is very strong actually. All right, so here's our neutral tint. Now we'll let these dry, and then we'll overlay each one of these with one of these 3 reds. So make sure when you mix up the red, the mid-tone red, that you have enough to put a stripe down on each one of these tints. So this is a little exercise I think you should do. You can do it in class or you can do it on your own, just so that you can see what different colors will do to create shadows for your reds. Our shadow swatches should be dry by now. Let's see what happens when we put some color on top of them. We'll start with our cool red, and we'll put a little swatch on here. Let's do all of the Permanent Rose. So let's do our mid-red mix that we created with the Permanent Rose and the Scarlet Lake together. Let's see what we get here. Do a little bit of a blend, which I should have done on the first one. But you should try this on your own and see what kinds of results you get. And now we'll do Scarlet Lake. And I think that you'll see as you're looking at these that certain shadow colors seem to work better with certain reds. So that might be something you want to keep in mind as you are working on your red projects. And there you have it. So, I think this looks weird, but it might be all right with a certain subject, like maybe tomatoes, which have a lot of green in the red. Certainly, the Scarlet Lake looks better with the botanical gray and the Windsor violet and even the neutral tint. So you can kind of decide which one suits you or suits the project better than another. So this is one little test that you can do before you start to paint, and this will help you to decide where you want to go with a subject. So now that we've tested some shadow colors for red and what possibilities are available, let's take a look at some specimens and see which one of the color shadow samples would work best. So here I have a little cherry tomato, which many of you had to paint for me in your Watercolor 1 class. But we can kind of look at this and let's see where we are in terms of color for this. We can use our color wheel again. And this looks like a red-orange, so I think we would have to start with Scarlet Lake. But then what shadow would we use for this? So let's go over here. And it looks to me like that Scarlet Lake might work best with the complement, and the one that we're using is, of course, sap green. So let's start with a little Scarlet Lake, because that's probably going to be our local color, right? And it's going to need a little bit more intensity than that. And we might want to add a little bit of cadmium yellow to that to get us closer to the shade that we're going to need. Now, that's our local color, but we need to add shadow to this. Let's try the green. That's just the slightest bit of sap green. And that looks pretty good. Now we might want it a little more intense. So we're still in a good space for this particular subject. So this is our cherry tomato. And we might want to put some cadmium yellow underneath as our tea wash. And then we would add sap green for our shadows. So this will be local color, which is Scarlet Lake plus cad yellow pale. So basically those are your colors, and you might find some other colors in here as well, but for this cherry tomato this would work quite well. And this is a warm red subject. Now let's take this petunia. So this one really leans towards the violet. So we would start probably with some permanent rose. And if we use the color wheel, we can see that this is probably permanent rose and almost a red violet. So we would add some ultramarine blue to this. And you could conceivably, for a tea wash, really lighten down and then add the darker concentration on top. Now, shadows. I think that if we could add more ultramarine, but is that going to make it too purple? Maybe we would be better off and maybe just add a little bit of botanical gray. Now that's not a bad shadow color. So we could try the same thing, only try it with neutral tint. So this is neutral tint. And we might need to add a little bit more. So you have some options here. This color here, this is the petunia. So this is the petunia local color would be permanent rose plus ultramarine blue. And the tea wash would definitely be a tint of the above. And then a shadow would be permanent rose, ultramarine. And I think I like the, personally I like the neutral tint. I think that if you put the complement into this color, it's going to make the violet get very muddy, and we don't want to lose that nice richness of the red violet in the painting of the subject. So I think either botanical gray, but I think neutral tint works better because the botanical gray has some yellow in it, which would tend to neutralize the violet. I have a zinnia here, which is more of a red-orange color. And if we look at it with the color wheel, we can see that it's probably Scarlet Lake, but this Scarlet Lake probably has a good concentration of green in it. And I can see some orange or cadmium yellow in the base of this. So you might want to start with a little cadmium yellow. And I would let this dry now and then come back to it when we can paint over it and still maintain that, that lovely cadmium underneath. But in the meantime, we're going to mix up some Scarlet Lake, and we'll add a little bit of sap green to the mix and see if that's our color. Looks pretty good to me. So you might want to even go darker. You will have to add, we could add more green, but I'm almost wondering if we should add a little permanent rose. Let's see what happens for some of these dark edges. Let's take some of that and put it right on that layer. And you could probably even go to a little Windsor Violet. Ooh, yes. I would do this dry rather than my letting it all bleed together here. We're going to use Windsor Violet for our shadow. We'll start with a tea wash, only a little stronger, of Cad Yellow Pale. And then we mix up our local color, Scarlet Lake, and a bit of sap green. And then for our shadows, add some permanent rose and or Windsor Violet. And that should give us a very nice representation of this zinnia. Now the last flower is Echeveria. And you can see from this that it's very similar to the petunia. So we may already have these colors and we don't have to do any more to it. But if you look at the center of this, all these little complete flowers in the center, notice all the reddish, brownish, orangey colors in there. These center colors are very similar to what we have here that we've established with the zinnia. So that's how you go about mixing these colors. So now we'll go to painting a specimen.